Okay, we got some big news here as this new breaking story has come out that from the actual government, you can see here from the front page of the Wall Street Journal, lab leak is most likely the origin of the virus and the pandemic. This comes from the Department of Energy, and this is now the second department in the government to say this here. And now you can see here, US China relations are deteriorating even more from the new disagreements over Ukraine and the C-19 origins and the pandemic. That's right. Take a listen to Congressman Jim Hines, ranking member of the Intelligence Committee here right now.
Congressman Jim Hines is a ranking member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Thanks so much. There's so much confusion about a lot of this. Let's talk about COVID-19 and Wuhan. Where do you come down on it?
Well, Andrea, first of all, I think Ken Delaney and your correspondent there got it exactly right. We may never know. We may never know. Now, we know some things with a fair degree of confidence, and one of the things that we maybe not know, but certainly the preponderance of the evidence is that this was not deliberately created. Apparently, and you're well beyond my ability to know the technical aspects of this, but apparently when a genetic code has been manipulated, that is fairly obvious to the many people who have now looked at the COVID genetic code. But look, the difference between a lab accident and natural spread in a marketplace is very, very difficult to determine when you've got perfectly transparent information where you can interview victims, where you can actually go and literally look at the distances. We, of course, have the opposite of that, which is a Chinese government which is stonewalling that information. So, again, I do think there's a little less than meets the eye here, because you do have one agency of several who has slightly adjusted their view on this. But, you know, until we get full transparency from the Chinese government, it's going to be very hard to reach a firm conclusion.
And let me ask you about the the intelligence and the reporting that China is seriously considering arming Russia with weapons, with artillery, with these munitions that are so badly needed by Moscow. You've got Xi meeting or going to Moscow this week, we think. How concerning is this? How credible is that? And is there an indication that China is changing its policy after all of these warnings from President Biden to Xi?
I don't think it's not clear that they're changing their policy. China tends to be pretty strategically smart on this stuff. And look, we can dispense very, very quickly with the statement that the foreign ministry made about how, well, we're being duplicitous by arming the Ukrainians and saying they can't arm the Russians. That's just absurd, right? There is no equivalence between Russia's brutal criminal invasion and Ukraine's desire to defend itself. I would think the Chinese would see that because they don't want to be invaded either. So that needs to be dispensed with quickly. But what I think, Andrea, is they probably are considering it. They're probably having all kinds of conversations. What we need to do is make it very plain to them the scorn that they would face internationally. The fact that, as you'll note in their peace plan, in their suggested peace plan, item number 12 in their peace plan was, let's work on the reconstruction of Ukraine. That's a lot of commercial business. And of course, if China were perceived, and we would know very quickly, to be one of the aggressors against Ukraine, they don't stand a prayer of getting any reconstruction business when that eventually comes. So I do suspect that they are considering it, and we're just in the process now of making sure they understand how catastrophic their decision to join an aggressor, to join a criminal aggressor, would be to their own interests.
Do you think it's likely that the Secretary of State, the Vice President, and the head of the CIA would come out and make these warnings before the world in Munich first, and now, at the United Nations and on television in 2 Sundays in a row? If it were based on false intelligence, just on foreign intelligence? I mean, give your sense of the credibility of it.
No, I don't think there's any chance at all that it's based on false intelligence. Again, I'm sure that there are advocates inside the Chinese government to join Russia, to provide ammunition, just as there are advocates in our government, to provide F-16s yesterday. This is a debate that I'm quite certain is happening. I'm sure that our intelligence is good. Our point here is a little bit like what we tried to do when we declassified intelligence a year ago to the start of the war, to make it very, very clear that the world is watching very closely, and that the consequences of choosing to provide lethal aid to the Russians would be disastrous. So I think it's a sort of an analogous effort to what we saw a year ago to try to dissuade the Russians from their ultimate invasion, and hopefully it will have some effect with the Chinese.
Yeah, so I want you to pay particular attention to what he said here at the beginning. I'm going to replay this short excerpt. Take a look at what he said. Did you catch this?
Right. We may never know. We may never know. Now, we know some things with a fair degree of confidence, and one of the things that we maybe not know, but we certainly the preponderance of the evidence is that this was not deliberately created. Apparently, and you're well beyond my ability to know the technical aspects of this, but apparently when a genetic code has been manipulated, that is fairly obvious to the many people who have now looked at the COVID genetic code.
Now, this is a congressman saying that the genetic code has been manipulated, and it's fairly obvious to the people that have all looked at this. Now, he's referring to the genetic code of the virus, being that it came from a lab. They have manipulated it. You guys, yeah, this is crazy stuff. You guys, and this is coming directly from a Democratic congressman. This is not a far right congressman. You guys can let me know your thoughts here on this, because now the problem here is that, you heard him say that we might not never know the origins unless China tells us, which will probably never happen. Like, you ever heard the expression pigs will fly? Well, that will probably have to happen before China gives us the information on that. Yeah. So, um, yeah, this is one of those things that it's like, hmm. And what do we do going from here? What do we do going forward? Also, you can see here, Dr. Fauci admits that the vaccines are, quote, suboptimal. Suboptimal. Here's what Dr. Fauci actually said here, and here's the actual details on this, okay? Dr. Anthony Fauci said the quiet part out loud last month, or more precisely, wrote it in actual writing. You can go and look it up. When he and the two National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease colleagues co-authored an article published by the prestigious Cell Host and Microbe. In the article, the former director of the NIAID and his colleagues declared that certain respiratory viruses, such as influenza A and the SARS-CoV-2, basically the C19 virus, among others, have not, quote, to date been effectively controlled by licensed or experimental vaccines. I think a lot of us kind of know this. It's a work in progress, maybe you could say. According to authors, quote, past attempts to elicit solid protection against mucosal respiratory viruses and to control the deadly outbreaks and pandemics they cause have been, quote, unsuccessful. Regarding influenza vaccines, the flu, they wrote, it has been known for decades that, quote, the rate of effectiveness and our best approved influenza vaccines would be inadequate for licensure for most other vaccine preventable diseases. More specifically, they noted the effectiveness of the influenza vaccines against clinically apparent infection tends to range from only 14% to 60% and be short lived, which is why you would, if you get the flu shot, you get it every flu season, typically in the fall or winter. They also highlighted that the influenza vaccine formulations are, quote, frequently not precisely matched to circulating virus strains. SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, they went on to state, exhibit deficiencies that are reminiscent of influenza vaccines. The vaccines for these two very different viruses, the authors explains, have common characteristics. they elicit incomplete and short-lived protection against evolving virus variants that escape population immunity. The reason for this, they elaborated, are the kinds of respiratory viruses against which vaccines tend to be most effective, and those that have long incubation periods spread systematically throughout a person's body after replicating mucosally and ultimately result in long-term, if not lifelong, immunity once cleared due to interactions with multiple components of a person's immune system. Now, measles, mumps, and rubella, the authors pointed out, are examples of diseases caused by respiratory viruses that share these features, which is why they can be effectively controlled with vaccines. You think about the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. Conversely, they explained why influenza viruses and SARS-CoV-2 are non-systemic respiratory viruses with short incubation periods and largely replicate locally in mucosal tissue, thus limiting the extent to which they interact with their host's immune system. So the question here is, what do? We have a virus, the new C19, and the flu virus, which does affect people and it does cause deaths every single year and has for a while. Okay. Um, what do? You have the flu shot, basically a vaccine that people take every year. Or do you take nothing, take your chances, and it is what it is, right? And you guys can let me know your thoughts here on this. Or will modern medicine keep evolving and get better and better throughout the years? Yeah. Now, will the C19 virus, which is still a pandemic at this point, will it be like the flu virus and at this point be around forever like the flu is now? Let me know your thoughts here in the comments and I'll keep you up to date here. So thank you so much for liking and sharing these videos. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on new videos. I'll keep you up to date here on this because this is literally new information coming out here every day. And I also keep you up to date here with everything else going on here in our country. Make sure to hit the bell icon after you subscribe. Here's some new videos you can watch next. Here is the first video on the breaking news story of when it just came out about what the Department of Energy said about the origins of this virus. Good video there. Or here's a video about millions of people losing Medicaid benefits or a bump on Social Security benefits, all in one video. So click on one of those videos next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.